A waiter sneered at a customer and said, "This place isn't for people like you." But what he didn't realize, that man wasn't just any customer. It was a billionaire and the actual owner of the restaurant. What happened next didn't just shock the waiter. It silenced the entire room. "This place isn't for people like you." The words cut through the air like a blade, cold and sharp enough to silence the quiet hum of chatter around the table. A young waiter, dressed in crisp black trousers and a starched white shirt, leaned forward, his posture stiff, his eyes narrowed with arrogance. He spoke with the kind of confidence that only ignorance could give, certain that he had the upper hand in this exchange. Sitting across from him was none other than Shaquille Big Shaq Johnson. His sheer presence filled the space. His towering frame, broad shoulders, and commanding aura made heads turn wherever he went. Those who recognized him often whispered his name in awe, but this particular waiter clearly hadn't taken the time to notice. To him, Shaq was just another customer, someone unworthy of respect. But Shaq wasn't just big in size. He was big in reputation, in history, in success. A former basketball legend who had transformed his fame into an empire, he was known not only for his athletic achievements, but also for his charm, humor, and countless business ventures. From real estate to tech companies, from media to food chains, his name was tied to enterprises across the globe. Yet in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the fact that Shaq wasn't dressed like a billionaire. That night, he had chosen simplicity, a plain gray hoodie, worn-in sneakers, and a pair of loose-fitting jeans. To the arrogant waiter's eyes, he looked ordinary, too ordinary for a place lined with golden chandeliers, marble floors, and fine dining guests in expensive suits and glittering gowns. And that was the mistake. The waiter gave him a once-over, his lips curling into a sneer that betrayed his lack of respect. "Sir," he said again, his voice dripping with disdain, "maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere cheaper." He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for nearby tables to hear, ensuring the insult hung in the air like a storm cloud. A few guests gasped in disbelief, their eyes darting between the waiter and Shaq. Who dared to speak that way to Big Shaq? Some recognized him instantly and shifted uncomfortably, shocked that anyone would insult a man of his stature. Others, oblivious to who he really was, merely saw a large man in casual clothes being humiliated by someone in uniform. But what the waiter didn't know, what not a single cruel word in his vocabulary could change, was this. The very restaurant he was standing in, the establishment with its polished wine glasses, velvet chairs, and marble pillars, belonged to the man he had just insulted. The paycheck in his pocket, the uniform on his back, the chandeliers hanging above his head, all of it was owned by the same man he had dismissed as unworthy. And soon, that truth would unravel before his very eyes. Shaq didn't flare up. He didn't shout, didn't slam his fists on the table, and didn't return the insult with anger. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with a composure that seemed almost unnatural in the face of such disrespect. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips, not out of amusement, but out of the kind of calm that comes from knowing the truth others are blind to. His friends at the table shifted uncomfortably, their jaws tightening, ready to jump in and defend him. They knew who Shaquille Big Shaq Johnson was, and they couldn't believe this waiter was foolish enough to speak to him that way. But before they could say anything, Shaq raised one massive hand, palm outward, signaling them to stay calm. His eyes, deep and steady, remained locked on the waiter. "I see," Shaq said quietly, his deep baritone voice steady and unshaken. The sound of it carried across the room, and even those who had been pretending not to listen leaned closer. "And why exactly is this place not for me?" His question was simple, but his tone carried a weight that made the waiter hesitate for the briefest second. But arrogance often blinds judgment. The waiter crossed his arms tightly, lifting his chin as if to stand taller against the towering man before him. His confidence, however misplaced, only seemed to grow. "Look around," he said sharply, waving his hand toward the wealthy diners seated in expensive suits and glittering gowns. "This is a high-class establishment. People come here to enjoy sophistication, elegance, and status. We have a certain standard to uphold. You don't exactly fit the image we're trying to keep." His words dripped with condescension, each syllable another jab meant to humiliate. The insult was clear. He wasn't simply mocking Shaq's choice of clothes or his casual appearance. He was mocking Shaq as a person. The implication was unmistakable. You don't belong here. You aren't worthy of this place. A hush fell heavy over the restaurant. The clinking of silverware stopped. Glasses were set down mid-sip. Diners leaned subtly toward one another, whispering nervously, their eyes darting back and forth between the towering man at the table and the waiter who seemed too blind to realize the gravity of his mistake. Some of the guests recognized Shaq immediately, whispering his name with disbelief, too afraid to interfere but wide-eyed at the confrontation unfolding before them. Others who didn't know him still felt the tension, sensing that the man being insulted wasn't someone ordinary. The waiter, however, remained oblivious. He smirked with satisfaction, as though he had claimed some invisible victory, as though belittling a customer made him superior. He saw only the hoodie, the sneakers, the relaxed demeanor, and none of the greatness sitting right in front of him. Shaq, however, was calm, almost too calm. His silence wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of patience. And patience, in this case, was about to become the waiter's biggest lesson, one he would never forget. Shaq finally rose from his seat, the quiet scrape of his chair against the polished marble floor echoing like thunder in the hushed restaurant. His massive figure seemed to grow even taller as he stood, casting a shadow over the trembling waiter. Conversations at nearby tables died instantly. The clinking of glasses and forks came to a halt. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, the weight of his presence impossible to ignore. "You know," Shaq began, his deep voice slow and deliberate, each word measured and heavy. "It's funny you say, I don't belong here." His tone wasn't angry, but it carried a quiet authority that made the air feel thicker, heavier. He slipped one hand casually into his pocket, and after a moment, pulled out a sleek black card. Without raising his voice, he placed it gently on the table in front of him. The sound of it touching the wood seemed to reverberate across the room. "Because last I checked, this place does belong to me." Gasps rippled across the restaurant like a wave. Some guests clapped their hands over their mouths. Others widened their eyes in disbelief. The waiter's face drained of color as the realization struck. His arrogant smirk dissolved into a pale, quivering mask of fear. His lips parted, but no words came out. Shaq wasn't finished. He straightened his back, his presence filling the room. "I bought this restaurant 3 years ago," he continued, his voice steady but laced with the gravity of truth. "I pay for those chandeliers above your head. I pay for the food on those plates. I pay for the fabric that made that uniform you're wearing right now. So when you tell me I don't belong here," his eyes locked firmly on the waiter, sharp as steel, "you're insulting the man who signs your paycheck." The silence that followed was suffocating. The waiter stumbled backward, his arrogance crumbling faster than sand in a storm. His voice shook as he tried to backtrack, his confidence shattered. "Yes, sir. I didn't realize. I didn't mean." But it was too late. The truth had already been revealed, and the weight of his mistake hung heavy in the air. His stuttered excuses fell flat, drowned out by the quiet murmurs of guests who now looked at him with judgment and disappointment. It wasn't just Shaq he had disrespected. It was the very foundation of respect and humility that his job demanded. The lesson was clear, and it was about to sink deeper than any apology could possibly cover. Section 4. Faced with tears of joy. Shaq didn't shout. He didn't raise his massive frame to intimidate the waiter, nor did he lash out in anger. He didn't fire him on the spot, though with a single word he easily could have ended the young man's career. Instead, Shaq leaned forward, his towering frame lowering just enough to close the distance between him and the trembling waiter. His voice dropped, not loud, but deep and steady, each word carrying the weight of wisdom and authority. "Respect," Shaq said, pausing deliberately so the word could sink in, "is not about what someone wears or how much money they look like they have. It's about treating every single person with dignity." His eyes never wavered, sharp yet calm, pinning the waiter in place. Because you never know who's sitting in front of you. Could be a billionaire. Could be someone struggling to get their next meal. Either way, they deserve kindness. The waiter stood frozen, his arrogance stripped away as quickly as it had appeared. His eyes dropped to the floor, unable to meet Shaq's gaze. His posture, once puffed up with misplaced pride, was now bent under the weight of humility. He realized that in trying to belittle someone else, he had only managed to expose his own smallness. Shaq didn't stop there. He slowly turned his head, his deep eyes sweeping across the entire restaurant. Every diner felt his gaze, and suddenly, it wasn't just the waiter receiving a lesson, it was the whole room. His voice rose just enough to carry, calm yet commanding. Too often we judge people by appearances, Shaq continued, his words echoing against the marble walls. We assume value based on clothing, on jewelry, on outward shows of wealth. But I can tell you this, money comes and goes. Clothes fade, watches break, fame disappears. None of it lasts forever. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Every ear was tuned to him. Every breath in the room held still. Then, Shaq placed his massive hand on the table, grounding his words with finality. Respect, though, respect lasts forever. It costs nothing, but it's worth more than everything you see around you. And it's something no one can take from you, unless you choose to throw it away. The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't out of shock or fear, it was out of awe. Diners exchanged glances, some nodding quietly, others reflecting on their own behavior. In that moment, Shaq wasn't just correcting a waiter. He was teaching everyone in the room a timeless truth, one that would follow them long after they walked out of that restaurant's golden doors. Shaq didn't shout. He didn't slam the table or flex his authority, though the sheer power he held in that room was undeniable. He didn't fire the waiter on the spot, though he easily could have, with just a snap of his fingers. Instead, he leaned forward, his towering presence drawing closer, lowering his voice to a calm but commanding tone that made the entire restaurant lean in. Every word he spoke carried weight, like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward until it touched every ear in the room. Respect, Shaq said slowly, letting the words settle in the air like a verdict, is not about what someone wears or how much money they look like they have. It's about treating every single person with dignity. His eyes didn't leave the waiter's face, which had gone pale under the intensity of Shaq's gaze. Because you never know who's sitting in front of you. Could be a billionaire. Could be someone struggling just to get through the day. But either way, he leaned in closer, his deep voice dropping almost to a whisper. They deserve kindness. The waiter's lips trembled, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved. His eyes, which moments before had looked down on Shaq with disdain, now stared at the polished floor in shame. His posture sagged, the puffed-up pride collapsing into something small and humbled. In his mind, the words repeated like an echo he couldn't silence. Respect lasts forever. But Shaq wasn't finished. Slowly, he straightened and turned his gaze outward, sweeping across the room like a spotlight. Couples paused mid-bite. Businessmen lowered their glasses of wine. Even the pianist at the corner of the room let his fingers hover above the keys, frozen. Shaq wasn't just talking to the waiter anymore. He was addressing everyone. Too often, he continued, his voice filling the restaurant, we judge people by appearances. We measure their worth by watches, by cars, by brands on their clothes. We look at someone and decide who they are, without ever giving them the respect to show us. He let the silence hang for a beat before his tone deepened. But let me tell you something. Money comes and goes. Clothes wear out. Fame fades. None of it lasts forever. He placed a hand on the table, his voice rising slightly, each word striking like a drumbeat. Respect, though, respect lasts forever. It costs you nothing, but it is worth more than everything you see in this room. A hush fell over the restaurant, heavy yet electric, the kind of silence where people weren't just listening, they were reflecting. Some diners nodded subtly. Others shifted uncomfortably as if recognizing their own judgments in Shaq's words. It was no longer about one waiter's mistake. It was about a truth that touched everyone. And in that moment, it became clear Shaq wasn't just correcting arrogance. He was leaving a mark on every soul present, a lesson that would outlast chandeliers, fine wine, and fleeting pride. That night became more than just an embarrassing moment for a young, arrogant waiter. It became a story whispered for years among the restaurant staff and passed along by regular diners like a timeless lesson. The humiliation that could have ended in anger or revenge instead became a turning point, not just for the waiter, but for everyone who heard about it. The young man who had once sneered with pride was humbled to his core. His apology wasn't half-hearted or forced. It came from a place of genuine regret. Shaq, rather than crushing him with punishment, chose a different path. He didn't fire the waiter on the spot, even though no one would have questioned the decision. Instead, he offered guidance. Shaq believed second chances carried more power than punishment ever could. Under Shaq's mentorship, the waiter transformed. He began to treat every guest, whether they wore designer suits or old jackets, with equal respect. He worked harder, listened more, and carried himself with humility. Soon, the very diners who once saw him as arrogant started noticing the change. For years afterward, whenever new staff joined the restaurant, they were quietly told the story of the night the owner himself was insulted and of how forgiveness, patience, and respect turned a mistake into a lifelong lesson. As for Shaq, the incident only added another layer to his already legendary reputation. People knew him as a giant on the basketball court, a shrewd businessman, and a celebrity who had conquered fame and fortune. But what made this story spread far and wide was not his wealth, nor his fame, but his character. In a world where power often gets flaunted and arrogance often responds to arrogance, Shaq showed something rare: grace under humiliation. He turned an insult into a teachable moment, proving that true greatness isn't in how you strike back, but in how you lift others up. Years later, in interviews, Shaq would often retell the story. "That night wasn't about me," he'd say with a smile. "It was about respect. Always treat people right, no matter who you think they are, because you never know whose table you're serving or whose life you might touch with your words." To this very day, diners who sit under the golden chandeliers sometimes glance toward the entrance, wondering if Big Shaq himself might walk in. The memory of that night lingers like a shadow on the marble floors, a reminder that the true test of character is not in how you handle success, but in how you handle disrespect. Because in the end, greatness isn't measured by the fortune you build, the fame you achieve, or the power you hold. True greatness is measured by how you treat those around you, especially when the world is watching. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.